Uh, so this is a video I've kind of been thinking about making for years, and I'm finally sitting down to do it. And it's partly because I remember being like an undergraduate in college and knowing pretty early on that, I wanted to, apply for PhD programs when I was done getting the bachelor's degree. And I was really, really hungry for like any knowledge, any like wisdom anybody had, any kind of insights that would be helpful at all. I was kind of in that mode of it's like, okay, it's noon, there's 12 hours between now and midnight. What should I do with those hours? What should I do with them? What's like the best way to like use this, these 4 years worth of time I have to put myself in the best position possible for that. And there's a ton of things that would have been like cool things to know. Um, I think later on, eventually, some people were kind of helpful, but at least in the early years, like a lot of the things, the advice I would get would be things like, get good grades, like get good GRE scores, and that's was kind of obvious. Um, but yeah, I thought now that I've kind of, as somebody who's sort of been through that process and who's kind of been around this stuff for a while, I might, make a video where I give some of my advice on like what I would tell somebody who's like a freshman or a sophomore in undergrad, or even, a junior or a senior, although the earlier you are, the more helpful this is probably going to be. I should just make a few disclaimers real quick. It has been a lot of years since I applied to programs and got accepted to the one I'm in now. So, you know, it's totally possible that not everything I say will age as well. There's probably might be some changes to the process that, impact the relevance of some of this, but I think it's probably still fairly relevant. And the other, disclaimer I should probably make is, obviously, I'm not a professor. I've never been on an admissions committee. I'm a grad student who's been a grad student for a while. But yeah, I've never take it with a grain of salt kind of for that reason that I've never personally been on an admissions committee and seen what goes on. I have known a lot of people over the years who have, either people I've known in grad school, then, who are professors now, or, professors I had as an undergrad or as a grad student that I learned bits and pieces of things from. So a little bit of accumulated knowledge there, but, I've never personally been on an admissions committee, obviously. So yeah, the one thing, number one, the most important piece of advice I can give is don't underestimate the personal statement. I think that was probably the biggest mistake I made initially. Because, sitting down as a sophomore and like looking through like the process and seeing, okay, so you've got to submit them transcripts, test scores, letters of recommendation, um, critical writing sample, and personal statement. And, the personal statement, it's 2 pages. It seemed very, very small to me, right? Compared with like a 20-page critical writing sample, compared to transcripts that are the work of, that reflect hundreds upon hundreds of hours of work, over years, compared to those two things, the personal statement's just 2 pages. It's like, it seemed like a very, very small thing. And I think I also kind of tricked myself into thinking it would probably take care of itself because it's like, okay, of course, 4 years of training, 4 years of, study. Of course, I'm going to have interesting things to say. Of course, I'll be able to say something that'll sound like great and, impressive when I sit down to write that, several years from now. But I think what I underestimated was that sort of precisely how you spend those years is going to have a big impact on what kind of personal statement you can write. Um, so I think knowing a little more about like what I was going to be expected to do there probably would have been helpful. Um, a lot of the book length works of literary scholarship I read when I was an undergrad were kind of single author focused, I was really, really, really into like Dickens scholarship for a long time. So I was like, for a while, I was just very obsessed with like, kind of the history of like, criticism of Dickens. And so I read a lot of books for that. Um, and, it was that kind of thing. Um, and that probably didn't help me as much. Um, the key thing with like a personal statement is that You know, y it's about sort of talking about what kind of, like, scholarship you want to do, which should be obvious, I guess, or should have been obvious to me, but, like, I think I had a very I mean, I was kinda dumb, but, I kinda knew that there were different people specialize in different historical periods and, like, nationalities, like, some people specialize in 19th century American lit, some people specialize in, like, British modernism, some people specialize in, like, Renaissance lit, some people are, like, Victorianists, and obviously, I kinda knew that. I don't think I had as clear of a sense of the fact that within that, there are also kind of a methodological sort of breakdown and like different critical approaches. Some people study, literature and the environment. Some people are more like poetry and poetics people. Some people do like, print culture, book history. Some people in Victorian, studies, children's lit was kind of a big thing for a little while there. And so it's like, if I'd known that I was gonna have to have more of a sense of like that, I think I was eventually told, when I was a senior, when I was like trying to write one that like, yeah, you want to, locate, the work you're going to try to do within some kind of pre-existing, methodological approach. And yeah, yeah, definitely. It makes perfect sense. But like, that's the kind of thing that if I'd known it earlier, I could have been a little bit better prepared for that. Because if you don't have like a lot of exposure to anything like that, if you haven't taken the time to, go read some books on like literature and the environment, like you get that kind of grounding, then you end up trying to do what I sort of tried to do the first time I was applying to programs, and you're basically kind of forcing yourself to try to invent a new type of literary criticism from scratch, and it's going to sound ridiculous. um so yeah, that would be like the number one item of advice I would have, is that if you're not already doing that, knowing a little something about like, you know, what you're gonna have to be able to say to write a good personal statement. The second item of advice I would have would be, this one will seem a little obvious, but I think anything you can do to improve as a writer is really, really good. Um, because, unlike the personal statement, the critical writing sample, it's very long. That, 20-page sample is going to give them a good sense of like how effective of a writer you are. And that takes a lot of time. Um, spending a lot of time on the critical writing sample is important, whatever like work you're sending them. Obviously making that as good as it can be is important, but like, how high your ceiling is in terms of how effective of a piece of writing you can create going into that is it's going to be determined really by like how much you've improved over like the course of the several years before that. And depending who you are, that might mean different things. That might mean, taking a lot of, upper division courses that require a 10-page um research essay, and using those to get better, or it might mean doing something different. But keeping in mind that that's like one of the goals, that's going to be one of the most important factors, I think, is really, really good. I know I spent a lot of time just studying and taking notes on literary works that do a lot of extracurricular reading, a lot of time just sitting with books and like taking notes on them. And it's I kinda like the fact that I did that, I kinda like the knowledge I got out of that, and, definitely some of my professors were kind of impressed a little bit at, some of the things I was, like, familiar with, during those undergraduate years, but it's a little bit of a trade-off because if there's an hour that's going into that, that could go into something that would actually make me, like, better as a writer, that probably would have been better, I think, to some extent. Um, Number 3, if you're applying to programs that require the GREs, the general test and or the subject test, it's a good idea to try to take those early. Not just because, just in case something goes wrong and you miss it or like you goof up and like think there's like 20 minutes left when there's 10 minutes left and leave some unanswered, just you want to give yourself some security for that. But moreover, for most of what I've heard over the years is that like the programs don't put that much importance on them. But if you haven't taken them yet, that's always gonna probably, occupy a little bit of your attention and your energy, and it's gonna be like one more thing you've gotta think a little bit about. Um, so, it's like if you could take those, like if you get both of those done, like, say, like, your junior year and you've got, like, decent enough scores, and it's just like, okay, like, then you can really then you've got that last stretch of months to really just kind of think about and, like, focus on the important things, like, the more important things. So those are 3 big items of advice I have, and I guess the 4th one, if I wanted to add a 4th one, yeah, definitely talk to your professors about what you want to do, because if they know that, like, you wanna do, like, grad school, you wanna, like, apply to programs when you're done, like, that's gonna be, like, really helpful because you never know who's gonna have something really interesting and really helpful to say about that. You never know who's gonna be willing to, take a look at your personal statement and give you thoughts on that kinda thing. So it's like the more people know, the better. Um, I know a lot of mine were really, really supportive, and that was really awesome. Okay, I think that's all I have to say, and hopefully that's something that people will find helpful.